Hey, hi, welcome again to yet another session at Microsoft Reactor. Today we would be talking about Kubernetes Arc, and thanks, Michael, for such a wonderful introduction. I'll go ahead and just take a snippet of the session, which actually we need to submit. So I'm just doing that. Many times I forget. So today we would be talking about Kubernetes Arc. Kubernetes Arc is just not for Kubernetes. Azure Arc, rather. Azure Arc is just not for Kubernetes. Azure Arc talks about virtual machines, talks about SQL servers, and it's like a hybrid and a multi-cloud type of solution. So in 2019, around this time frame, November, in the Microsoft Ignite conference, Azure Arc was announced as one of the features. And Arc is all about hybrid and multi-cloud environment. So this is a product from Azure. If you look at the portal, you can go to Azure Arc here, and you would find that there are a lot of stuffs which you can integrate with. One is set of virtual machines. You have Azure Stack, you have Kubernetes clusters, you have other servers, and you have SQL servers. So what advantage do we get when we have our infrastructure at one place on Azure Arc? How it helps us to manage. We would certainly see the demo with respect to Kubernetes, but it's a generic solution which will help us to extend our Azure's management plane onto your on-premises, or imagine that I am having some set of projects in which Azure is my primary cloud, but yes, I do use other services or other cloud provider services. Few of my EC2 instances are running in, say, AWS, few are running in Google. Then we go ahead and manage all of the servers from the same place. That is from the Azure's portal. And that's the reason we use this. So at the launch, it supported virtual machines, both Windows and Linux. It supported Kubernetes cluster, and slowly they have extended their support to SQL servers, Azure Stack, and all that stuff. So if my servers are in Google Cloud, AWS, on-prem, Azure, it's a single place to monitor the stuffs. What type of stuffs I can do with it? Like using Azure Arc, I would be able to manage all my resources. Through this portal, I can even view my EC2 instances, my Google Compute instances, or my EKS cluster, a cluster running on my on-premises, or a GKE cluster, or a Azure SQL Server. Everything can be seen with a single view here. One more important part is we know Azure has role-based access control, which with we can secure our resources. My primary cloud is Azure, and I've already created my Azure RBAC, my Azure policies, everything is in place. And now when I'm moving to a secondary cloud, could be for the DRM, deploying few of my resources in AWS, then we can apply the same Azure RBAC, Azure policies to those resources as well. Once those resources are visible on my Azure Arc, you would find that here we have the options for management as well. I would be able to manage, like if I go to my Kubernetes clusters, I would be able to enable, I've already created few clusters and kept. So I would be able to go ahead and monitor those clusters from this place. So these are few of the monitoring solutions. We know Log Analytics is our logging solution from Azure. Azure Monitor is a monitoring solutions. So We can use Azure's log analytics, we can use Azure Security Center and all, and keep our resources secure, log them, monitor them from a single place. We can audit using Azure's activity logs. We can query with Azure's resource graph. A lot of services which are of Azure's, I can still go ahead and apply them to my other cloud provider servers or on-premises servers. Now, how does this work? So what we would do, let me bring up my drawing board. So first we would be starting with, I need a management terminal from where I'll sit and manage all the commands and all that stuff, right? I would be executing some commands. So you can think that this is Mamta's workstation. And in this workstation, I will label what all things I have already pre-installed. I have installed Azure's CLI. After that, I have done AZ login and I have set my subscription. We normally go ahead and do AZ account set. I would request everyone to be on mute, and in case you have any question, please raise your hand. We will unmute you so that you can ask the question and you will give your subscription ID. I've done this. So I've logged in into Azure CLI command line interface from here. Then I have gone ahead and installed AWS CLI. This is to interact with AWS resources. I have gone ahead and executed AWS configure, provided my access key and secret key. Region, the default one. And I have, just give me 1 second. Let me see who's on unmute.
It's okay. I'll sort that out. I'll try and work through it. You keep going if that's all right. And I'll try and mute everyone for you. Sorry about this.
No issues. Thanks, Michael. After that, I have gone ahead and because we would be doing a demo with respect to Azure Arc Kubernetes, I have gone ahead and installed kubectl, which is Kubernetes command line interface. And I have also installed AKS CTL or Azure Kubernetes command line interface. So these things are pre-installed in my system. So in case you want to try out this actions which we do in the workshop today, then you would need these packages to be installed and configured on your workstation. We will go ahead and create resources. The blue box is my Azure Cloud, and my Azure Cloud is having this workstation as well. So this workstation is residing in Azure Cloud. This workstation is also Azure's virtual machine, which I have created. You can create it anywhere. Then, for some reason, I couldn't deploy a GKE cluster because my account was not working as expected. So I'll just do a demo with your AWS and Azure setup. So this is my Azure Cloud account. And this is the other one is my AWS Cloud. We would be spinning up resources. You can spin up virtual machines. Today, we would be setting up a EKS cluster here. So we would be setting up EKS cluster here, a 2-node cluster. And here we would be setting up a AKS cluster. Then I would be using Azure Arc service, and I would register this AKS cluster and then this EKS cluster to Azure Arc. As we discussed, with Azure Arc, I would be able to manage my AKS and EKS cluster as if that cluster is residing in my Azure cloud. I want to deploy applications in my Kubernetes cluster, I would be able to do that. So how Azure Arc is able to attain this? That's important. So Azure Arc actually goes ahead and deploys some agents. Agents are getting deployed in non-Azure resources, which are like AWS EC2 instances or AWS EKS cluster or on-premises virtual machine. An agent would be deployed. And once that agent is deployed, the machine would register with Azure and would be ready for the management. So this is how we would go ahead and install and start using Azure Arc to manage our other resources. When we attach and configure, like in our case, we would be attaching the Kubernetes cluster. So this Kubernetes cluster can run anywhere. This Kubernetes cluster can run anywhere. It can run in on-premises, it can run in your Azure stack, it can run outside with other cloud providers. These are running outside in other cloud providers, and everything is managed by Azure Arc here. Monitored with Azure Monitor. Azure Sentinel is there for security, Security Center is there, policies are there, even RBAC would be integrated. So I can manage them from one single place. I can see my AWS EKS cluster. I can see my Google Kubernetes engine. I can see my on-premises Kubernetes cluster on the Azure portal. These resources, which are not Azure resources, they will also get a Azure resource ID. And they would be placed inside one subscription. How normally we create resources, we have a subscription, we have a resource group. So despite of these resources belonging to AWS or GKE and all that, I would have a resource group, a subscription, and a resource ID associated to it. We can even tag these resources and manage them. So what Azure Arc does, Azure Arc goes ahead and it actually registers, or rather I would say, it would go ahead and install in all these clusters which are there, in all these clusters, it will install some agents. In Kubernetes, we know there's something called as namespace. There was a question asking, can we register OpenShift clusters? Yes, you can register OpenShift clusters. And if needed, we can certainly upload this slides as well. I'll share it with you.
Sorry, excuse me, please remain on mute.
Guys, please make sure you people are on mute. This is a recorded, this sessions are getting recorded. Even later, it doesn't look good when we have these things. So here in Kubernetes, we have namespace. Namespace helps us in logically dividing cluster. Logically dividing cluster, that means I can create a namespace in my Kubernetes cluster, and in that I can run just dev workload. Like that, Azure Arc goes and creates a Azure Arc namespace. And it goes ahead and deploys some pods which play the role of an agent. And the work is to make sure that this clusters which are not residing in our Azure Cloud, it is with other cloud providers, or it is with, say, on-premises, wherever it is running, those agents would be up and running. We can even enable SSL, standard SSL, to secure our data when they do it. Obviously, data would be going from other cloud providers or on-premises to coming to Azure Cloud. That time we can go ahead and use SSL to secure our data in transit. And whenever the data is in rest as well, we can encrypt and we can ensure the data's confidentiality. Sorry. So you can think that Azure Arc is like a single inventory in which I can list all my Azure clusters. And the best part with it is that I can even do a lot of stuffs. I can go ahead and you can see here, we have written that if you have a Git repository, my developer sitting here is pushing the changes and it is going ahead and deploying those in the cluster. So we can also do automated rollouts of our application. We can deploy our applications with the help of Azure Arc, GitOps operator. So deploying application, applying configurations using GitOps-based configuration management, we can do. Monitoring, we have already discussed about. So these are a few of the basic features. Let's see, how do we register? So in Kubernetes, we have a kubeconfig file. So whenever you create a cluster, there is a variable called as kubeconfig, which stores the path of your Kubernetes conf file. The Kubernetes conf file holds data like which user on which cluster will this kubectl command would get executed. So whenever you execute a kubectl command, it actually goes and looks for this kubeconfig file, and it understands as which user on which cluster you are executing the command. Suppose you do get nodes. So Kubernetes has two things. One is authentication and one is authorization. For authentication, we can have like Azure AD. I can integrate that with, and I can have my users added, and I can authenticate whether, say, Mahesh is a user in my cluster or not. And then authorization tells us what Mahesh can do. These two things gets validated whenever you execute the command with the help of this configuration file. Every user will have a configuration file. And this configuration file would be checked whenever you are executing this kubectl command. This variable, it's an environment variable which is set. So a config file is needed. The context should be pointing to the correct cluster. Azure Arc has read-write permission enabled. We would have an extension called as connected K8s. That extension needs to be installed. And as soon as that extension gets installed, we have Helm 3. And obviously Azure CLI, as I mentioned, we need that. This is the extension I'm talking about. Then only I would be able to execute this connected K8s command. It's a Azure CLI extension, which we would be discussing about. So I'll just go ahead and close the slides and let's see how do we deal with it. How do I, oh, this Teams sometimes really troubles. Okay, so now our work to have a EKS cluster. Then I need to have a AKS cluster. So I already have a AKS cluster, which was in stop state. Yesterday I had created and I had kept that in stop state. I'll go ahead and start that. So you can see here, these are mentioned as Azure Arc type, and this is my Kubernetes cluster, which is belonging to the Kubernetes service. I'll create one more cluster and I'll show you, but I'll start this cluster as well. Earlier, we were not able to stop Azure clusters in Kubernetes cluster in Azure, but this feature is now enabled. And if you want to stop your Kubernetes cluster, you don't get charged for it. That's one good feature which has been introduced. So I'm going ahead and starting my Azure cluster. Let me see the node pools. How many nodes do I have in it? I have one node pool and number of nodes which are there in it. There would be two node cluster if I'm not wrong, or a single node cluster, either of. So it's taking a bit of time to populate. Let's wait. Let me see if we have any questions meantime. Okay. It's showing timed out. I don't know why. Okay, no problem. It has one node in it. And if I wish, I can scale the nodes and all. So I'm just living with one node cluster. So this cluster we can certainly interact using Azure Cloud because this is Azure Kubernetes cluster. What I have done, I have spin up the cluster and I have executed that AKS get credential command, and I have got the cluster credentials and I can interact with the cluster. Let me show you. This is the command. AKS get credentials. I would give the resource group name and I will go ahead and give the cluster name. So my resource group is my AKS Archie and my cluster name is, oh, sorry, hyphen name is cluster Azure. So when you do this, it fetches that cluster's credential. And if you guys can see here, it goes ahead and populates this config file. It is present in this folder. This is the time when the configuration file is fetched from the cluster and placed in this workstation. So I have my Kubernetes cluster configuration. If I do kubectl get nodes, it would be actually interacting with my AKS cluster and it is dumping the details over here. Now, in Kubernetes, we have a kubectl config command with which you can see all the different contexts of different clusters which you have. You can see here, one context is for cluster Azure, another context is for my AWS EKS. This is the other clusters context. How can I switch from one cluster to other cluster context? I'll say kubectl config and I'll say use context. And I'll give the name of the context. This is my name of the context. It says switched to this. So here we have switched ourselves to the Kubernetes cluster context of EKS cluster, which is already running in my AWS set like cloud environment. In that, I'm having two nodes set up. As I said, I have also gone ahead and configured my AWS CLI with AWS configure. I can go ahead and create cluster. I have installed EKSCTL as well. I can go ahead and create my cluster. And let me just show you. I'll create one more cluster and I'll leave that terminal open. So I'll name this cluster as AWS Cluster 2. We can supply a lot of other parameters like how many nodes you need, how many node pools you need. I'm not specifying all of those stuffs. And I'll open one more terminal, which will help me in connecting with it. 2119.253.69. This is my workstation's IP address. So in the other terminal, my EKS cluster is coming up. So I'll just leave this open. And I'll do one more thing. I'll set up a AKS cluster as well. So we will go to our Kubernetes service. I'll go ahead and create a Kubernetes cluster. I'll give a name to it. Let me just choose the same resource group. I'll go ahead and give Azure cluster 2, East US region, providing the availability zone across which I'll be distributing, version 1.20.3. Azure Arc supports all the clusters above 1. Like on and above 1.13. That is one of the limitations. I'll go ahead and change the size to a smaller size. Okay, I don't have an option. So, okay, let me live with the default one, D2S, DS2. And I would go with manual. I'll spin up 2-node cluster. And I'm not going to change anything. I would just go ahead and just set Azure CNI. Integration part, I'm not changing anything. I'll show how if a non-enabled cluster of monitoring is there and an enabled cluster of monitoring is there, how it would be different. So here I have enabled monitoring and I'll go ahead and hit on review and create. Meantime, let's go back and check what is the status of our EKS cluster. It's getting built up. This is my AWS console. I can go and fetch for the clusters. This is my first cluster, which was active from before. And this is the second cluster, which is getting created. So I am actually having two clusters now. One cluster, two clusters each in our cloud account. So this has cluster 1 and AKS cluster 2. And then for the EKS as well, I have a EKS cluster 1 and EKS cluster 2. But I've gone crazy. I'm writing 1 and saying 2 and writing 2 and saying 1. Okay. So these are the two set of clusters which would be there. Azure Arc has only registered 1 clusters each. I'll show you how we can register our AKS cluster 2 and our EKS cluster as well, our EKS cluster 2. This part I'll show. So first time when we are doing, I'll give you a list of commands which I have executed. In the chat, I'm going ahead and putting it. So let me just check all the steps which are, yeah. These are the commands for configuring our Azure and AWS Cloud. Then I've gone ahead . and executed these commands for setting up the cluster in AWS. Once those clusters are up, I can even execute EKS command like EKS CTL get cluster. I would be able to list my AWS clusters. Yeah. So EKS clusters are visible. At present, two are there. One is yet to create here. If I go ahead and refresh, could be that one is still in creating state. This is already created. Every cluster has a node pool and a node, you can see. The node pool has two T3 micro instances, small instances have taken. And same way, our AKS cluster would also have a set of nodes. So we would wait for this cluster to come up and then only we can register it. Meantime, let's see. This would have asked for validation and create. I'm hit on create here. So both the clusters are getting created. Now let me go ahead and give you some more commands. The kubectl config get context command is there on the chat. And I would go ahead and give you the use context command as well. Please be on mute, Pankaj.
Please mute yourselves. Thank you.
So we need to add some extensions, as I mentioned. One is K8s configuration extension. This command needs to be executed so that we can go ahead and have K8s configuration enabled. We would be using GitOps to go ahead and deploy the applications in our AKS and EKS cluster from a single pane here. That's the reason I'm using that extension. Same way, there is one more extension. Let me see if I can find that. Connected. K8s is the extension name. I think I have missed that. Okay, I'll just figure that out and I'll send you that as well. If normally we go ahead and execute these commands, the commands gets executed on the cluster where actually the context is set. So we would be setting the context and going ahead and executing the command. Like if I want to deploy, let me just go ahead and get a GitHub link of mine. I'll do a Git clone of a Git repository. I'll give that on the chat as well to you people. So this has a lot of Kubernetes YAML files, which you can learn to deploy the applications. So I can go ahead and deploy a demo pod.yaml using this file. I'll just go ahead and cat this file. I'm just deploying a demo application with image nginx, a single pod with a single container. That's my intention. So when I say kubectl create -f and give the demo pod.yaml file name, it is actually going ahead and deploying these resources in my EKS cluster at present. Why? Because if you go ahead and list the context, my context would be set. You can see this asterisk symbol. Whichever context is active, on that context, you would have that asterisk symbol. And whatever commands you're going to execute, that command would get executed on that particular cluster. So if I do kubectl get all, I should be able to see the demo pod getting created in one of the nodes in the cluster in AWS. It is in pending state. Let's see what has happened. kubectl logs. There are no logs. So I think there are some resource. How do we debug this? We can even look at kubectl get events. Too many parts are there. It doesn't have that much of capability to deploy the resources. And that's the reason it says I'm failing the scheduling. Already things are running in different namespace. No problem. I'll go ahead and switch the context, kubectl config, and I'll say use context. Okay, I had to give the name of the context, my bad. Let me just fetch this context. And from a single place, I can go ahead and list my AKS cluster now. And you can see there are resources already running. I'll do get nodes, and you would find out that I have a single node cluster here. I want to deploy that from here. I can go ahead and execute this command. Now this command is running in my, AKS cluster. Let's see. It is in container creating state, and it should be up and running in a while. There I have taken T2 micro instances. We had already deployed some applications. I had done it for demo check to be ready for today's session. That's the reason there it said, I don't have any resources to take you in. 0 out of 2 nodes are available. Too many pods are already there, so I'm failing the scheduling. And that's the reason our pod never came up in running state. It was in pending state. But if we look at the pod, the same pod which we deployed in our AKS cluster, it is up and running. And I can go ahead and have the service as a load balancer type of service, and I can even go ahead and access my application. Like if you see, I have this. I have deployed AKS Hello World, and I should see this application up and running. And this application is running in my AKS cluster. So this, what I did, I'm individually going ahead and deploying. That's not something which is really good. I should be able to automatically, or rather automatically automate is not the correct statement, automate the entire process of going ahead and deploying the stuffs. For that, we will have to connect our cluster to this and then go ahead and deploy a few stuffs. So I'll go ahead and see if my EKS cluster is up. I think it should be up by now. And yes, it is up. Let's go and see. There should be 2 nodes. No nodes have come up yet. Okay, no problem. Let's see. This cluster is at least up. Let me register this cluster with Azure Arc. So how do we do registration of our cluster with Azure Arc? Let me fetch the command. The command is I'll show you the context. Get context command. We will add a new context here. Command is az connected k8s connect. Give the name of the cluster. So this is not the name of the cluster which you have given. This is the name of the cluster you want to be visible in your Azure Arc portal. So I can pick up the same name. I don't have any issues. I'll pick up the same name. And my Azure Arc should have a resource group and a location. I can give that. So if I go ahead and show you the Azure Arc, here, if I go to this, I can add this, click on this add. And here you can see to identify or create a Kubernetes cluster to set up a local machine. All the commands are being given. And after this, it asks me to create an Azure Arc resource group. I have created an Azure Arc resource group already, and that resource group is my uh, Arc demo. Arc demo. And this is the name of the cluster with which the cluster would be visible. Like my cluster would be visible with Azure Cluster 2, and in which region it should be visible. I can even go ahead and tag. So this gives me an output like this. This is the command. You can construct the command from this portal itself. I have already done AZ login. I've set my subscription. Now it's time for me to execute this command and go ahead and register. This is the resource group already created under which the resources would be visible. Whether it is a EKS cluster, whether it is a GKE cluster, whichever cluster it is, it would be visible inside this. That's the main agenda. Now, let me go ahead. I have those command details. I'll go ahead and copy this section and I'll paste it here. So operation might take a while. I already have a name with that cluster. Let me try giving a different name. Cluster to Azure. I think it didn't understand that -2 at the end. What is it? Let me go and check here. Cluster. Why it is giving this error? I'm giving a different name. Okay, let me create one more resource group then. I would give the location. And let me give a resource group called as demo 2. What is bad in it? Azure group create is the command, if I'm not wrong. Yes, resource group is created. Now let me register it. And I'll give a different resource group name. I don't know why it didn't identify this name. I made some mistake. It's already onboarded. It says already onboarded. Yeah, that was the problem. Oh, I understood what's the problem. Okay. Now I could recollect. So the context you are in, whichever context of the cluster you are in, it actually takes that cluster and registers that with this name. So cluster Azure is already present. I didn't fetch the context of the new cluster, which I have created like a fool. I haven't done that. So I should have executed the AZ get credential command first, fetched my AKS credentials, get the config file, and then go ahead and register that. So context is not created. I was also wondering why the hell it is saying so. No problem. We do learn from mistakes. I'm sorry for it. So this is the name of the resource group. Hopefully you people understood. It was registering this cluster because the context was set to cluster Azure, and it was trying to register it with the same Azure Arc, and it said, I already have that under me. So I'll create a new context. I need to get the name of the cluster. I would specify with hyphen name. And now I should have that context. Now if I execute that command, this should run now. Azure Cluster 2 and resource group. The operation might take some seconds. It is trying to register. So after a while, when Azure Arc namespace would get created, agents would be deployed. After that only, your cluster would get registered with Azure Arc, and you would be able to see your cluster under that Azure Arc portal. So let's be in this Azure Arc. You can see here, it has popped up, but it would not be in connected state. If I go ahead and click on it, it would be still in connecting state. You can see the status, it is not in connected state. If I look at the other cluster which I have, it shows connected. This cluster is also, this is at present showing offline because I think that cluster of mine is having some problem or something, I'm not sure. Resources were also not getting deployed in it. So we had fetched up a new cluster here. So we will add this cluster now to our AKS or Azure Arc rather. So my one Azure cluster is getting registered. It is in connecting state. So we will wait for that to come to connected. It has come to connected. I should have this prompt back in a while. Meantime, let me go to the other terminal. EKS cluster setup has been done from here. I would go ahead and fetch. I would go ahead and list my EKS clusters. I would give the name of the cluster and fetch the configuration. It is in Oregon region, correct? This is the cluster. So how I fetch the context for EKS? For EKS, if I have to fetch the context, I have to say which region is my EKS cluster. I want to update my configuration, and that too for this cluster. It's the synonym of our AZ AKS get credential. Now, if I go ahead and do config get contexts, it should show me my AWS cluster as well. So this is the one which is showing up. So you can see here, this cluster we have got up right now. I can do kubectl get nodes. Because I fetched this, here the context got added and switched to that. So this is my EKS cluster. Now I want to register this cluster to my Azure Arc. Same again, the same command we would go ahead and execute. AZ connected K8S connect, give the name. I would give this name. And we have to give the name of the resource group, resource group. If I'm not wrong, the name was Arc demo. And I can set the location as West US. So this will take a while, and this also will show up there. So if I go to this page now, in a while, I should see another one more cluster getting listed over here. This has yet not given me the prompt back, even though registration has happened, because in the backend, few things it validates and then it gives you the prompt back saying that your cluster is now active to be managed by Azure Arc. And that is the reason in the AKS part, I was not getting it. You can see this. This is the output of your AZ connected k8s connect command. This tells you that you have Kubernetes connected cluster. Same way, this EKS cluster also, when gets connected, I should have this also showing up and I should get the prompt back. I'll just refresh. It should be there in a while. So this and this cluster I'm registering now. The other two clusters, this and this, I have registered it yesterday. It also shows what is the version and all those stuffs. I can see them and I can look into each of the cluster details. Now I'll take you to one of the clusters and we will see we had enabled monitoring for this. I'll go to Insights. We would say configure Azure Monitor. A log analytics workspace will get created and Azure Monitor would be enabled. Same way for a EKS cluster also, I can enable monitoring and I can go ahead and monitor that cluster from here. It would take a while, around 5 minutes for getting that entire monitoring set up. Let me go back and look at the other cluster. Meantime, by the time this comes up, it is showing up connected. I'll go ahead and enable the monitoring for this as well. I'll go to my previous Azure cluster. I'm enabling monitoring for all the 4 clusters which we have. If it is healthy, not healthy, everything can be seen from single page from here. We can go to Azure Monitor, and after a while, we should be able to monitor our resources from here. So it has grabbed the version and all that stuff as well, you can see. So you need to provide the correct location. If I've not provided the correct location during creation, it's my mistake. And it's not like it will go and fetch, fetch from which region I'm fetching up those details. It doesn't have that intelligence. So my Azure Arc clusters are registered. And this is the single place from where I can see my AWS cluster. I can go ahead and see the namespaces, what are belonging inside it. I can go ahead and even deploy my applications from a single place. I've just now enabled monitoring. So it'll take a while to get completely onboarded. It says onboarding at present, and that's the reason few things are not showing up. So we will come back in a while and we will go ahead and so the command for connecting a cluster to your Azure Arc is there on the chat. But remember, you have to be in the proper context, not like Mamta already added that cluster to your Azure Arc and then retrying and adding it again. So change the context, add the cluster. That's the funda behind it. So let's wait for Azure Monitor. I'll go to Azure Monitor from here. We should have container insights. In this, I should see the clusters which are getting monitored. So what is healthy, what is not healthy, all of them would show up in a while, which doesn't have a data, all of them would be visible. If you can see, few of the clusters are getting registered separately. One is a part of Azure Arc, it has got registered. This is part of AKS, it has got registered. I can still go ahead and remove it. So the data of AWS cluster is yet not been collected, and that's the reason it's not showing up here. Cluster Azure, it says healthy. If I go here, Azure Monitor, beautiful tool, which has been introduced, a bit costly, but it gives a huge amount of information. And what beauty of Azure Arc, my cluster is running in AWS. I can see the node utilization, CPU utilization, the memory utilization of the nodes, everything from a single place. I don't have to log into my AWS portal. I don't have to log into my GKE portal. I don't have to get into my on-premises. Everything visible from a central location. So this is showing up cluster level resource utilization, nodes memory utilization, how many nodes are there, how many active pods are running, all would be visible here. So node level details, further details, if you want to see, you can see the node pool, and then you can have the nodes. You can see what is running on those nodes. We can check what all agents are running on those nodes and all that stuff. So I want to show you, let me see which cluster I'm in. This is that EKS cluster I'm in. I want to go ahead and do get namespace. This is that Azure Arc Monitor namespace. And for monitoring purpose, we have this Azure Monitor Containers separately. So I'll go ahead and do kubectl get all and give this namespace name. So there are a lot of agents, that Azure AD agent, metrics agent, flux agent, controller manager, some extension manager. For connecting, we have agent. For grabbing the metadata, we have an agent. All of them make things work. So most of them, if you see, all of them have been deployed as part of kind deployment in Kubernetes because we need high availability of it. And these are two exposed ones which have services associated to it. So this is one namespace, and this namespace, let me show you. For Azure Monitor, we have that. It's yet not deployed completely, and that's the reason it is not showing up. Now, there was a question from Venkat, how can this be extended to app metrics apart from node, pod, and KATS level metrics? App level metrics, you want to pod, app is pods metrics you're talking about, or application level stuffs. Then in the matrices section, you can check the matrices of your pods and all that. You can even go ahead and check the application workload and all that stuff over here. You can specify what would be the scope, and you can even have those details over here. So this would help us in getting that. Insights is just giving our cluster level insights. Pod level insights also you get over here. It's just not that a cluster level stuff. In a pod, there is a container running. It would also show you pod level matrices. You can even see them. You can see here containers. Containers are nothing but the application workload, right? So you have this containers running, their matrices also show up. We can use Prometheus integration with Azure Monitor. Yes, certainly we can do that. And we can go ahead and scrape and have things in the Prometheus. So we have the ability of doing those things, integrating with Prometheus in Azure Monitor already. Is it allowed to manage AZ application insights of the cluster? So application details would be collected on the container level. Here you can see cluster level details would be collected here, or node level details would be collected here. Whatever controllers are running, that details would be collected here. You can see each one of them over here. You can get into more details about it by just expanding them and looking into, clicking on them and checking on them. You can go ahead and check those. You can go to the log analytics as well. Can we scrape from multiple Prometheus instances dedicated for app versus K8s and then present a unified view? Yes. So Azure Monitor supports both the things, right? Kubernetes cluster as well, and from the normal applications as well. So you can do scraping. It's not Kubernetes cluster is integrating with Prometheus. Prometheus agent would certainly get deployed for scraping it, but Azure Monitor has the capability of integrating with Prometheus. So you can do it for Kubernetes cluster, you can do it for your normal applications as well, both the things. You are not just defining that for the K8s cluster. That is for any type of resource you're running. So that is possible. So this was the monitoring part. Now the last part which I want to show is, so we have registered this, and whenever you are doing use context, fetching the context and grabbing, you are actually feeling that you're talking here, but you're going ahead and giving instructions over here. That ability we are having. And from the same portal, you can manage all the stuffs. Yes, we can do that as well. Krish is asking, can we integrate AWS and Azure cluster applications through event management, like Azure Event Grid? Yes, we can do that as well. So all the services which are there on the Azure level, like Event Grid, you have Security Center, you have RBAC, you have policies, everything which you apply to your Azure resources that can be applied on the AWS or the Google or on-premises level as well. All those services would be available on those too. Now I'll take you back to Azure Arc, and I'll go ahead and click on my Kubernetes cluster. This is the cluster which we have deployed. You can see here, there is something called as GitOps. GitOps helps us in adding a configuration. I can go ahead and create configuration. Then this flux operator would help me in interacting with the cluster and deploying things. I will provide my Git repository links, and I'll go ahead and add some configuration so that as and when we are going ahead and making the changes, as soon as you push the code, my things would get deployed here. That's the beauty of it. So I have a Git repo ready for it to test out that. Just give me a second. I'll give you that repo link. It has been raining really bad in Bangalore, or rather I'd say the south part of India in last few days, and like things are not looking that great from climate wise. So this is the repo link. And I've already cloned that here. No, I haven't. I'll just clone it here and I'll show you what else is there in it. So these have some files like namespaces files, have YAML files to create namespaces. It'll just create a namespace name ITOps. It has a file which helps me create a namespace called Time. And then similarly, a file for team B. Then if I go out of this and I go to cluster apps, I have a sample application in which I have created a kind deployment, 2 replicas. It has hello world image I've taken and I've changed the title of it. And this is the service. I'm deploying the application with service type load balancer. So this part is for deploying the application, and this part is for exposing the application. Now let me see if any other folder was there in this. What is this team A? Let's look into this. Okay. One endpoints.yaml is also there, in which we are creating a kind config map. So these are set of resources which I want to deploy, and I just don't want to deploy. I want to do a CI/CD pipeline setup. As and when there is a code change in any of my YAML files, automatically those resources would get deployed or updated in my Kubernetes cluster. That part I want to do. So my code would be residing in GitHub. GitHub has my remote repo. Here I can have my local repo. If you want, you make the changes here and then push the changes, or you can make the changes here. For the demo purpose, I'm doing that. As soon as I make the changes here, it will go and apply those changes in my connected cluster, whichever cluster I wish to. So I can go ahead and do this integration. This integration is called as GitOps integration. I need to create a GitOps configuration and tell which is the Git link which I would be integrating with my cluster. So I need to create a Kubernetes configuration for it. Let's see how do we do that. So I'm going back to the home directory. The command is az k8s configuration create. This is the command. I have to name the cluster configuration which I'm creating. I'll say cluster config 1. I have to give the name of the cluster here. So I'll do one thing. I'll go ahead and first switch to my proper cluster to which I want to apply, and then I'll do that. So I'll run az config get context. Oh, context spelling. See what is it? Oh, kubectl config get context. When you learn too many things, this is how you do. So this is the cluster I want to set up to. So I'll just pick up this and say kubectl config, use context, and give the context name. The context name is this. The string was coming from before, so I made a mistake. Use context, and I'll give this context. Yes, it has switched. kubectl get nodes. Let's verify it is going and executing in that. Amazing. Now I'll go ahead and say that for this cluster, create a Kubernetes configuration. And I have to give a lot of stuffs. I gave the cluster name. I have to give the resource group name, there are few operators and other stuffs which I have to give. I'll just copy and I'll show you what exactly I'm writing. Huh. Let me just increase the font size. Okay. So the command goes like this. Configuration spelling is a typo. AKS configuration create. The name of the configuration which I would be creating, the cluster name for which I'm creating, the resource group in which the configuration would be created, and I need to name the configurations. There would be an operator created to put that configuration into that cluster. So I'm just giving a name. Let me give a similar name here. I'll just say config1. Operator's namespace name it will create. It would go ahead, create a namespace, and then in that it would go ahead and deploy operator. And the work of that operator is to keep monitoring our GitHub. If there is a change, it has to redeploy the steps, and which GitHub link is being provided here. So whenever there is a change, it would go ahead and deploy the new version of my application. So the cluster type I have to give is connected cluster. The scope is specified as cluster. So with this, I'll create a configuration. Let's see. It says this command is deprecated. Now the command is actually to create K8s configuration flux create. You just change this first part as K8s configuration flux create because I've been using this tool for long. I'm just a bit used to the older version of it. It is still pending. Configuration is getting updated. Let's go back and check. This is what we have created: operators instance, operators namespace, operator scope. Here it is in pending state. So with this, what happens? Those resources which we were talking about, the ITOps namespace, the team A namespace, team B namespace, everything will get auto-deployed. Whatever is in my Git repo, it's equivalent to kubectl apply everything in my cluster. That's the beauty of your GitOps configuration. And first time it is applying the entire set of stuffs which I have defined in my Azure repos. From next time onwards, if I'm making any changes, the delta also would get applied. So we will wait for this to show up in operator state as running. Just refresh this. Yeah, it is installed. Let's go ahead and do kubectl get ns. See this. ITOps, team A, team B. And if you do kubectl get all, you should have that AKS stuff running. Which context are we in? kubectl config get contexts. Cluster 2, which I have right now created. My applications are up and running, and I can welcome to the Azure Arc webinar. Now, let's do one thing. If I open an incognito window, it will ask me to log in, and I don't remember my GitHub credentials, so I'll open a normal window. So this is my code. These are the files. So these files, if I'm going to make any changes, it will get auto-applied. At present, let's see the cluster app. This had 2 replicas, and it had welcome to Azure Arc webinar. First, I'll do one thing. Imagine that this code is cloned in my local and I want to scale. I'll commit these changes. In some time, you should see that reflecting in my cluster. I'll just say -w and I'll watch at this command's output. So what happens when it scales, I would be able to see over here that I'm scaling from 2 instances of the pod to 4 instances of the pod. And then we'll try to make some other change and see whether it is also applying in this cluster or not. So how can we get the open telemetry data of the application running in containers? With the help of Prometheus scraping and all, you can get all the data, matrices and all that stuff. You can enable that and you can have it in a single place. Satish was saying use Telegraph. Okay. Avik is asking, do Azure Arc handle service mesh like Anthos? So I would say Azure Arc versus Anthos versus AWS. Uh, what's that? I think it is Outpost, that feature. They are all comparable. So Anthos also has the capability, if your cluster is running in Azure, it is running in on-prem, it is running in Google, it can go ahead and give you a single point of control plane. Azure Arc is a competitor of that, I would say. They both try to solve the same use case. Yeah, Outpost, yeah, Gopi. So does this GitOps namespace be restricted within the users under a cluster? When we are creating resources, that time we can specify namespaces as well in which you're planning to deploy. Because I didn't specify anything, it deployed my application in my default namespace. So yes, you can even go ahead and deploy. From the GitOps, when deployment happens, it is not confining to a specific namespace. It can't do that. But in Kubernetes, we have an option specifying the namespace there, right? When you specify the namespace in the YAML file, it will only get deployed there. And suppose I'm the user who doesn't have the authority to execute those commands, then I would not be able to do that. Satish is saying open service mesh is supported on Azure as AKS add-on. Yes. Could be used with Azure Arc supported Kubernetes. Yes, it can be. Correct. So now I have 4 instances of my application running and I have a load balancer in front of it because the service type is load balancer. I'll go ahead and apply one more change to it and roll out the changes. What is today's date? 20th November. So in some time, our website, which is deployed, serving the web page of, it was stating that the web page is welcome to Azure Arc. That would be updated and that would have, one sec. That would have this new updated message. And that would only happen when the rollout happens. And we know how in Kubernetes the rollout happens. Deployment will go ahead and deploy the new set of replicas. So we will wait for that message. Little bit latency is there because obviously the resources are getting deployed, tools are different, regions are different. Little bit latency you would find, but it's a good thing that from a central location, I can go ahead and apply my changes to several places. So you just need to create a config. If I'm creating that same configuration in 2 clusters, like my EKS cluster and my AKS cluster, in both the places at one go, I can go ahead and roll out my changes. That's the beauty of it. So let me see if it is going ahead and deploying my new set of replicas. At present, it is yet not triggered. When we have that, we will see a new replica set coming up, right? So that is yet not happened. I have committed the changes or not. Let me just go ahead and check that. I did. Yeah, so in a while it should be updating. Normally we don't see this much of latency. I don't know why it is pretty slow today. Let's see. So these are a few of the advantages. Today's session would be short. I think we are 12. So we are bang on time. Normally we do 2 hours of session, which we prefer to do 2 hours. Today, I think we have finished in 1.5 an hour. If we have any further questions, we can certainly ask, and we can wait for this deployment to get updated in a while. And same way, we can create context configuration in our EKS context and deploy the resources there as well. Hope you people enjoyed it. Michael, today's session was a bit short. These things I had for the demo. So
That's okay. Thank you very much for such a wonderful session.
So in case we have any further questions, we can certainly pick that up.
Yeah, if anyone wants to post any questions in the chat, we've got a little bit of time to work through those, so please, by all means, do. We have a hand up. Yeah.
Please.
Okay, so why don't we go with Satish? I think someone had the hand up.
Yeah, Satish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm not sure if I missed this part, Mamta. The demo was really good. Can you talk a bit more about how the Arc agent tries to communicate outside? Are there any specific things that need to be taken care of when you're installing Arc on either on-premise or other cloud providers?
My cluster can be behind a proxy. If my cluster is behind a proxy, when I take you to the Azure Arc portal, that time when you are trying to create a Kubernetes cluster, the settings are a bit different if your cluster is behind a proxy or your cluster is not behind a proxy. If it is behind a proxy, then yes, little bit of settings are needed. Otherwise, automatically, there are some set of agents which are running like that cluster identity operator, which will actually go ahead and the first outbound communications and all which it happens. We have in Microsoft Azure, we have managed service identity, right? It will create a MSI certificate and then the communication happens. So like that, there are several agents running. Config agent is there, which will actually watch the connected cluster for source control configuration changes. If we are applying anything, the compliance and all those would be monitored by the configuration agent. Then we have a controller manager. Like, let me just list all those agents with kubectl get ns because I also don't remember each one of them. And do get all with -n Azure Arc. Yeah. So these are a few of the ones, like the metadata operators would gather the clusters metadata. It will include clusters version, how many nodes are there, what Azure Arc agent version is running. That would also show up. Then you have that connect agent. That connect agent helps us in the reverse proxy type of thing. It's a reverse proxy type of agent that would enable us to provide when we execute any command, the command actually goes to the API server, right? In the cluster, in Kubernetes, only API server is the front end part of our cluster. So it helps us connect to that API server. Then you have identity operator, which I specified, config agent I've specified, controller manager I've specified, then extension manager. Whenever we are deploying anything that is actually this entire Azure Arc, whatever got deployed here, this part, that is deployed as Helm template. So its work is to manage that Helm charts. Then you have that AAD type of agent that is for Active Directory. Flux log agent is there, which helps us in doing the logging. Metrics agent collects matrices. These are few of the agents which are running. And this comes up as part of the Helm template. The first command when you execute it to connect your cluster with your Azure Arc, that is when these agents got deployed. As such, if it is not behind proxy, then you don't have to take any tension. If it is behind proxy, then obviously little bit of changes are there. And when the data is exchanging, few things would be like a push notification, few things will be like a pull notification. Like agent will push your cluster's configuration, agent will push your number of nodes configuration, agent will push your agent version configuration. But when any upgrade happens, like suppose agent upgrade is happening, then agent pulls that from Azure Arc that I want an update now. Flux operator, when it is getting installed, at that point of time, if any updates are there, then agent will push that changes. Azure policy assignments, when you're doing those changes, would be pulled. So the communication is in both the directions. Few notifications are push, few notifications are pull. So you would find your cluster would be in connecting state when that registration hasn't complete. It would be in connected state when your registration is completely done. There is a heartbeat which is going between with the agent that is happening. If that heartbeat is not responding for 15 minutes, and so it will show offline. And if your MSI certificates are expiring, then your state can show expired as well. So these are few of the states you can see them.
We have a follow-up, I'm thinking.
Yeah,
from Satish, yes.
We'll work with the team to prepare a follow-up. What is it?
Mamta, I have a follow-up question. You mentioned
Yes.
about AD, Active Directory. What level of RBAC integration does Arc support for Arc-enabled Kubernetes clusters?
The roles which we are having, like the users which we have, suppose in Kubernetes also we have RBAC, in Azure also we have RBAC, right? Role-based access control. So I can have an Azure AD user, say for example, Michael is my user, and I want to add Michael only for dev namespace. Then this user has to be added as per the role-based access control. So I can create role. I think we had done a session on this in which we created roles for Azure AD users and we did role binding. And we told what actions this roles can do and to which users it would be binded. So which kind of user, like in case Michael is a normal user, or I have a group of users like developers, or I have service principal with whom I would do. So how we have RBAC in Kubernetes, instead of creating Kubernetes role-based access control, we first go ahead and create an Azure AD user. And according to that, I'll create roles and role bindings in Kubernetes cluster. So Michael would be authenticated with Azure AD. And then when he has some actions to be done in the Kubernetes cluster, he would be even authorized with the help of Azure AD's role-based access control. We can create roles and bind that roles on the Azure level and specify who can do what in my cluster. That is also possible. So with Azure Arc also, we can do this.
Okay, so there's maybe two questions in the chat. So we'll just finish off with those two. I think there's one from Krish that you could see, and then we might do the one below that, and then we might wrap it up if that's all right.
Yeah. So there's a question from Sai. If we have a local KTS cluster, can I link it with Azure Arc similar to how we have done? Yes. So local means on-prem side. So we can go ahead and do that. You don't have to do anything. You just need to have your config file, and in the server from where you are interacting with your local cluster, you can go ahead and set to that context with kubectl get context, use context command, set to that context and issue the same command. Your even local cluster, which are on-prem, I can run a Minikube cluster on my laptop, and that also I can integrate with Azure Arc. I can even do that. So the steps are all same. There is nothing like steps would be different. It's just that you have to get the configuration file. So if you set that kubeconfig variable properly and you have your conf file available, you set to that context and issue that az connected k8s command. Even if you're with your local cluster, you would be able to do the same. Exact same steps are there. There's nothing different. Yes, you would see all the resource utilization, application matrices, everything in Azure's Container Insight. Yes, you can do that for that part of question. How Arc will maintain security with respect to AWS and GKS connectivity? Do we need to have something separately to maintain enterprise level security? By default, it has that encryptions and all. You can enable your own key-based encryption. You want to supply your own customer managed keys, then you can do that. In transit also, the data is encrypted, and at rest also the data is encrypted. On the enterprise level, to be very frank, Krish, I haven't used yet this particular service. So I'm not sure if we are using this in enterprise level with some compliances where we have to follow, then how we would be able to do that. In case I find any good document listing that, then I can put that in the meetup page. You can refer that in a day or two. Moving on to the next question, Venkat is asking, building on that, what requirements did Azure Arc impose on the necessary network requirements for the agent to securely transport bidirectional? So VPC peering and such. So it's not like VPC peering or something. It is just going ahead and deploying a set of resources in your cluster. How we are deploying a set of applications in my cluster, does it need VPC peering? No, right? So it's not network to network peering, which is happening across cloud, not at all. Understand that Azure Arc is creating a namespace, and there it is going ahead and deploying its application. How I have a Nginx application, a Cassandra DB application, I have a, say, for example, Redis application. Like that, Azure Arc is on also an application who has the intelligence of monitoring the clusters and collecting the matrices, collecting that information. And that's the reason if you see those many agents which are running, they have the specific roles. So it is not VPC peering or VNet peering, not at all like that, Venkat. Hope that answers your question. And it's just that one application is running in my Kubernetes cluster, which has the capability of collecting matrices, data of my entire cluster, metadata of my entire cluster, and then send it out. That is the thing behind it. Yeah, it happens on the internet. We would make a note of it. Michael, the last part which Rishi has pinged, if we can make a note of it, they want Azure Arc with Azure Stack. If we are planning any session in future, then we can certainly go ahead and look at that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, I want to thank you so much for giving your time, Mamta, and sharing that wonderful session with the audience. We had a really great audience, great feedback, lots of information. I'm very grateful for you all giving up your time and wanting to learn with the Microsoft Reactor team. As you see, I've put a link to a survey in there. If you get the time and you could fill that in, that would help me work with my team over there to help shape some more content. Things like the suggestions that you've put forward allow us to, really target things that you would like to hear and would like to learn. So please be sure to fill that in. I don't often get to host too many sessions for my friends in India. I'm here in Sydney in Australia, so it was a great pleasure to be a part of it. Sorry that you didn't win the T20 World Cup. I'm pleased to say it was as us, but if it wasn't us, I was hoping it would be you. And we look forward to our next cricket match together. But without further ado, I will thank you again and end our session on that note.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Michael. And thanks
Thank
for
you.
filling in on behalf of Vivek and Rashmika on short notice. And thanks everyone for attending and for sharing such a wonderful feedback. Hope we meet in some other session in future. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you. Okay, bye-bye then, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mamta.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.